All right, let's talk about learning. Today, we're going to completely change the way you think about it. I'm not talking about little study hacks or tips. We're diving deep into the cognitive science of how our brains actually hold on to information, so you can finally learn smarter, not just harder. You know the feeling, right? We have all been there. You've spent hours, maybe the whole night, just staring at a textbook. You read a page, you get to the bottom, and you have absolutely no idea what you just read. Or even worse, you walk into that exam feeling kind of confident, and then poof, your mind is a total blank. It is one of the most frustrating feelings in the world. And when that happens, it's so easy to blame ourselves, isn't it? We think, oh, I'm just not smart enough for this subject, or my brain just doesn't work that way. But here's the thing, and this is going to be the core idea for our entire conversation. The problem isn't you. It's not about your intelligence. It's about a fundamental mismatch between how we think we learn and how our brains are actually wired. You've basically been trying to build a house with a screwdriver. You just have the wrong tools for the job. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get into the weeds on why we forget things and the deceptive tricks our own brains play on us. Then we're going to break down 6 powerful, science-backed strategies that are total game changers. We'll talk about pulling, not pushing information, mixing and spacing your studying, connecting and creating, and finally, how to reflect and truly master the process. Okay, so why do the most common study habits, the ones that really feel like you're working hard, so often just fail us? Well, the answer comes from this classic psychology experiment that perfectly shows the flaw in how we usually approach learning. So check this out. Scientists basically took 2 groups of students. Group A, they did what most of us do. They were told to study by just rereading the material over and over and over, highlighting, looking at your notes. It's all passive. Group B, on the other hand, did something totally different. They read the material just one time. That's it. Then the book was closed, and their only job was to try and actively recall everything they could remember from scratch. Purely active effort. Now, here's where it gets wild. Right after the study session, they gave both groups a test. And Group A, the rereaders, they actually did a little bit better. It seemed like their method worked. But, and this is the kicker, when they brought everyone back for a surprise test a few days later, the results completely flipped. Group B, the ones who only read it once and then recalled, they didn't just do better, they crushed Group A. Their long-term memory for the material was way, way stronger. So that leads to the big question, right? How on earth did the group that spent less time looking at the material actually learn it better? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Well, the answer is that our brains are playing 2 very powerful and very sneaky tricks on us. The first one is called the Fluency Illusion. See, when you reread something, it gets easier for your brain to process each time. It feels smooth, familiar, fluent. And here's the bug in our system. Our brain mistakes that feeling of ease for feeling of mastery. But they are not the same thing at all. It's like hearing a song on the radio 100 times. You recognize the tune instantly, it feels familiar, but if someone asked you to sing all the lyrics, you'd probably be stuck after the first line. That's fluency, not mastery. And that illusion leads to an even bigger problem: metacognition failure. Metacognition is just a fancy word for your ability to judge what you actually know. It's your brain's own progress report. But because of the fluency illusion, your brain sends you a totally wrong signal. It says, yep, this feels easy, I got this. And what do? You stop studying. You think you've mastered it, when in reality, you've just become familiar with it. So if our brains are tricking us, how do we fight back? Well, that brings us to our very first and maybe the most powerful strategy of them all. It's the core lesson from that experiment. It's the power of retrieval. We have to flip our whole model of learning upside down. We tend to think our brain is like a storage unit, and learning is just about stuffing more and more boxes of information inside. But real, lasting learning is the exact opposite. It's about practicing pulling the information out. Every single time you struggle for a moment and then successfully retrieve a memory, you're sending a powerful signal to your brain that says, hey, this piece of information is important. Build a stronger pathway to it. So how do you actually do this? It's really simple. First, self-testing. The second you finish reading a chapter, shut the book. No peeking. And then just write down everything you can remember. Key ideas, definitions, anything. Second, try the Feynman technique. Pick a concept and try to explain it out loud, in the simplest terms you can, like you're talking to a 10-year-old. If you find yourself using jargon or getting stuck, that's a giant red flag that you don't really understand it yet. Okay, retrieval is the what. But the when and the how you retrieve that information are just as critical. This is where our next two powerhouse strategies come into play: spaced practice and interleaving. So we all know that our memory fades over time. Cramming is like trying to build a sandcastle as the tide is coming in. It's a losing battle. Spaced practice, however, uses this forgetting to its advantage. Instead of reviewing something 10 times in one night, you review it at increasing intervals, maybe after a day, then a few days later, then a week later. You let yourself forget a little bit because that makes the act of recalling it harder, and it's that desirable difficulty that forges a much stronger long-term memory. Now, if spacing is about mixing up your timing, interleaving is about mixing up your subjects or problem types. Blocked practice is when you do 20 problems of the same type in a row. It feels productive, but all you're really training is short-term repetition. Interleaving is when you mix it all up. You do a math problem, then a history question, then a different type of math problem. It feels harder and a bit chaotic, but it forces your brain to do something way more important. It has to learn how to identify what kind of problem it's looking at before it can even try to solve it. That's a real-world skill. All right, so we know what to do, retrieve, and we know when to do it, spaced out and mixed up. But how do we make new information really mean something? How do we make it part of us? That brings us to our next two strategies: connect and create. So let's talk about elaboration and generation. Think of it like this. Elaboration is about looking to the past. You're actively trying to connect this new idea to everything you already know. You're building a web. Generation is about looking to the future. You're trying to generate an answer or solve a problem before you're actually shown how. Even if your guess is totally wrong, that effort of trying first primes your brain, making it way more receptive to learning the actual solution. And you can put these into practice right away. For elaboration, just get in the habit of constantly asking, what does this remind me of? Or how is this similar to? Make up your own crazy analogies. And for generation, here's a killer trick. Before you even read a textbook chapter, flip to the end and try to answer the review questions. You'll probably get them wrong, but that's the point. The struggle to guess will make the answers so much more memorable when you finally find them. Okay, we've covered 5 incredibly powerful strategies, but this last one, this is the glue that holds everything together. It's the meta strategy that lets you step back, diagnose your own learning, and basically become your own best coach. And that strategy is reflection. This is simply the act of thinking about how you're learning. It's about taking a moment to analyze your process. Are your methods actually working, or are you just doing what feels comfortable? A learner who never reflects is kind of like a ship without a rudder. They're putting in a ton of effort, but they might be sailing in completely the wrong direction. So how do you do this? Honestly, it can be as simple as spending 5 minutes a week with a learning journal. You just ask yourself a few tough questions. This week, was I really challenging myself? Or was I just rereading my notes because it felt easy? What's my weakest area? And what strategy can I use to attack it? Of these 6 big ideas we talked about, which ones am I actually using? And which ones am I totally ignoring? This little check-in is what keeps you honest and on track. And that really brings us to the biggest takeaway here. These 6 strategies, they're not just about passing a biology exam or learning a new language. They're about developing what is maybe the single most important skill you can have in life: mastering the process of learning itself. Once you know how to learn effectively, you gain this incredible confidence that you can tackle any new complex subject that comes your way. So I'll leave you with this one question. As you think about all these tools, retrieval, spacing, interleaving, connecting, creating, and reflecting, which one are you going to try first? Just pick one. Because turning this knowledge into action, that's the very first step on the path to becoming a truly masterful lifelong learner. Thanks for tuning in.